Mike Sielski, who was asking a lot of questions that I was thinking about as this whole process has gone on. He writes about it over at Philly.com in the Inquirer. Columnist Mike Sielski, he joins me now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN as we kind of hit that lull in the Eagles' offseason here, although there's never really an offseason, Mike, for the Eagles. I thought you asked a lot of very poignant questions about this team moving forward, which was, here's a team that's been 7-9 and didn't make the playoffs for 2 straight years, yet the Eagles have kind of gone out of their way to keep that core together. So it suggests that they see something that maybe was there that the previous regime did not get the most out of. Is that the implication here?
I think that's part of it, Mike. I think the other part of it is that it's harder anymore to find a way to rebuild or even build a championship caliber team in the NFL without a lot of draft picks and without drafting well. There are just fewer players who are hitting free agency. More and more teams are signing their own guys earlier, kind of similar to what's happened in Major League Baseball over the last few years. And in the Eagles situation, because they had given up, a net of 2 draft picks to get Carson Wentz and didn't have quite as many picks as Roseman likes to have, at his disposal, they kind of looked around and said, okay, well, we've got to, I guess, keep the young guys who we kind of sort of like. And as I said, it's not the kind of situation where, if you think you can get a better tight end than Zach Ertz, it's just easy to go out and pluck one off the tight end tree. It doesn't work that way. So they kind of felt like they had to bank on guys like Ertz and Lane Johnson and Malcolm Jenkins, and even Brent Selleck, signing him to a 3-year deal, to keep this core together, to try to make a run at it and grow together. The question I have is, if these guys were all so great, why weren't they a playoff team, as you said, last year, and why did they collapse down the stretch in 2014?
Yeah, now, you kind of phrased the question, so was Chip Kelly the biggest problem then? He didn't seem to tackle that, but did you get a feel that in a roundabout way he was trying to say, of course he was, but I'm not going to tell you that?
Yeah, he did. He spoke at one point about how you can't keep continuing to have all this turnover year after year. And that seemed, a pretty oblique reference to all the changes, DeMarco Murray and Byron that themselves under Roseman in 2011. And now they're kind of sort of trying it again this year by, not holding on to all of their draft picks. Now they're, I guess, kind of trying to counterbalance that by signing this core of young players. As I said in my column, I think the issue that they could run into is that what if this core of players just isn't very good? You only have so many chances in the NFL to pick a top-level talent, and it may very well turn out to be that Lane Johnson and Zach Ertz, and these other guys are, hope that Carson Wentz is all at quarterback to make you a contender.
Mike, is this to surmise, though, then that betting that your core comes together is a better bet than continuing to try to turn things over, even if your core goes 7-9 one year? Because in the NFL, it seems like you can go from 7-9 to 11-5 just because the games are so close. One score here switches things there, and that continuity means more than talent almost.
They're certainly betting on that, and I totally see the argument for that. One of the issues I might have, though, would be that if you're going to do that, you might be better served by holding on to a quarterback such as Sam Bradford, who, if he's healthy, and if he can catch lightning in a bottle and your team can catch lightning in a bottle, might be able to put you in a position to win a championship, assuming you hold on to all your draft picks and draft well. They went the other route. They traded away some draft picks, and, in this attempt to get Carson Wentz, who they're banking is going to be a franchise, no doubt about it, stud quarterback, but who may very well not be. And if he's not, then they've really set themselves back. So it's not quite a catch-22, but they did have 2 distinct choices here. They could really try to augment the rest of the roster and keep Bradford and make a run at it year after year as long as Bradford was around. And what's interesting about that, of course, is I wrote earlier in the week that quarterbacks are actually playing better longer in the NFL these days. It's not unusual to see a quarterback starting to have career years in his early, mid, even late 30s. Guys like Carson Palmer, Ryan Fitzpatrick, even the upper echelon quarterbacks like Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Eli Manning are having terrific years well into their 30s. So they could have done that too. You know, the idea that you needed to trade to upgrade from Bradford when he might actually be hitting the prime of his career right now was another option. You know, they felt they needed to, so we'll see how it goes.
So Mike Sielski is with us, Philly.com, the Inquirer here, his column on Howie Roseman basically taking a gamble that this 7-9 roster is a good enough roster because, Mike, they've got more guaranteed money in this roster than any other team in the league, and that goes to Fletcher Cox, who has more money than anybody in league history other than two quarterbacks. So he is really gambling that his current roster, and I guess this is a little bit of him betting on himself because a lot of these guys are the guys that he took prior to getting pushed down the hallway.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, really you have Malcolm Jenkins, who was a chip guy, and they gave Bradford a lot of money over a short-term contract, and he was a chip guy, and that's pretty much it. They're holding on to guys who you know, they drafted while Roseman was in charge. So, yeah, I do think there is an element of ego to this with respect to Howie. You know, I also think that, you know, they are taking a step back and looking at this and saying, you know, we've had a ton of turnover in recent years, and that's no way to build anything, so let's try the continuity route. You know, the problem they have, I think, is that to do that, they've got to, they absolutely have to have gotten the quarterback position right. And you know, Howie harked back yesterday a lot to what Joe Banner and Andy Reid did in the early 2000s, that they would lock up guys, you know, promising young players to long-term and cost-effective deals, and they would be willing to say goodbye to these, you know, older veteran players, and that helped them sustain success. The difference is that they knew they had something in Donovan McNabb, you know, basically a year and a half into McNabb's career, and that's when the Eagles started doing those, making those moves and signing players to those contracts, because they knew they had a franchise quarterback in McNabb. They knew he would keep them in championship contention pretty much year after year for the next 8 or 9 years. So once you've got that settled, then you can keep the rest of your core, and continuity makes a difference. At this point, they have, you know, they may think they know what they have in Carson Wentz, but I would argue they really don't, that nobody really knows. So that's where this whole thing could go wrong. If they missed at the quarterback position and they've just, you know, held on to kind of what turns out to be a mediocre to above average core.
Mike Sielski talking about the Eagles. Mike, they put $63 guaranteed million into Fletcher Cox's pocket, and you know, we mentioned the $280 million they have in guarantees. Is giving a defensive tackle the blueprint of success in the NFL? Is that the guy that the Howie Roseman-led Eagles should be hitching their wagon to?
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I'm not sure that defensive tackle is necessarily a make-or-break position in the league, but I'm also not sure what else the Eagles could have done. I mean, the market, what the market was what the market was. You know, you had guys like Darius, you know, who had gotten similar contracts, who had not, you know, were not quite at the level of Fletcher Cox, and you weren't going to not sign him. I mean, if you would try to franchise him for the next couple of years, he'd have been unhappy. Everybody around the team would have known he was unhappy, and it would have bled into the locker room. And so I'm not sure how much choice the Eagles had there, and I don't have that much of a problem with it in the sense that the salary cap's going to increase. Cox is a terrific player. I'm not sure any defensive tackle is worth that amount of money, but if there's anybody, you know, he might be. But even a guy like him isn't J.J. Watt, you know, so, you know, he may have to be a great, you know, transcendent sort of player. Again, to get the Eagles where they want to go. They're kind of counting on all these things working out, all these players developing. You know, Lane Johnson becoming not just a pretty good right or left tackle, but, you know, one of the 3 or 4 best in the NFL. Zach Ertz becoming one of the 2 or 3 best tight ends in the NFL. Yeah. You know, Brent Selleck at 31 continuing to be productive. So, you know, that's a lot to bet on right now.
Now, as you mentioned in your column at Philly.com, guys, you can read the full piece. 6 years for Cox, Lane Johnson, 5 for Jenkins and Ertz and Curry, 3 for Selleck. You know, in your mind, are these the right guys that the Eagles should have been targeting and as their core? I mean, do we look at this team who has never won a Super Bowl, that we know, and they're changing things over, as Howie said, the turnover had to stop but are these the right guys to target for 5-6 years to say these are going to be your Eagles that are going to be here for the long haul?
I think in some cases they're right. In some cases there are major questions. Take Vinny Curry. He's been an effective spot pass rusher in his career so far. That's all he's been. So the idea of giving him 5 years at the price tag they gave him, that doesn't come without some modicum of risk. Like, what if he can't play against the run? I know they think he can. I know he thinks he can. Mm-hmm. But we don't have any evidence to say that he can. So we have to see. Lane Johnson, I can understand that. But again, I feel better if Johnson were already showing himself to be, an incredibly promising right tackle, which he's been fine. He's been fine. Same thing with Ertz. Ertz seems to me a little bit of a safer bet. And I have no qualms with Cox and Jenkins because they're terrific players, right now, and they're young enough that you can devote that much time to them. But I think it's kind of split down the middle in that regard. So, was it necessary to give each of these guys 5 years, 6 years? I don't know, but I guess that's Roseman's way of showing a sign of faith that we're going to stick this out.
Hey, Mike, I'd like to get your opinion. I think Howie was asked this yesterday. It's a question that I've been asking a lot on the show here is, if Jim Schwartz doesn't get this job, does Fletcher Cox get $63 million? Are they basically betting that the play of former tackles in his system will warrant the money they gave Fletcher Cox?
I think that's definitely a factor. My colleague Les Bowen from the Daily News had a good analogy that, we were talking about it the other day, and I said, they're putting an awful lot of eggs in Jim Schwartz's basket, and this idea that his system and his scheme and his coaching are going to unleash these guys who are already here and weren't particularly good under Billy Davis to, be better players and be more productive and all these things. And Les's analogy was it's kind of like, the old Atlanta Braves pitching staff, Leo Mazzoni, the pitching coach, that no matter who showed up there, Leo could get them to throw shutouts, and they'd have career years with those guys. And so that's kind of what you're counting on, is that Jim Schwartz is some kind of, shaman of defense, and that he's going to, turn all these guys into, far better players than they had been.
Yeah, in the past, here's the interesting thing. He had Sue. Sue signed that huge money but left Schwartz. He had Darius, who signed all that money, and then Schwartz left. This is really the first guy that got the money and is now entering Schwartz. So it feels like, hey, and Roseman said this yesterday, if we let him play in Schwartz's system, he might get $70 million. We had to try to get him before he put up the big numbers that we think he's going to put up in this particular system.
Hey, the mantra might as well be for the Eagles, let the Schwartz be with you, I guess. They're put, as I said, they're putting an awful lot of eggs in his basket, and it better work out.
Let me ask you this. You were there yesterday with Fletcher. If you're going to give a guy $63 million and not have a concern that he's going to turn into an Albert Hainsworth type guy who just basically fell flat after the contract, do you feel comfortable that Fletcher Cox is the kind of guy that can handle making $63 million guaranteed dollars?
I feel as comfortable with Fletcher as I would with just about anybody in the NFL. So graded on that curve. He seems to have held on to a bit of his humility, his groundedness. He's from, Yazoo City, Mississippi. with $63 million, he could probably fund city government of Yazoo City for the next 20 years. So by all indications, he seems to be the kind of guy who can handle this, who won't let it go to his head, and who'll continue to work hard and do all the things that put him in the position to get $63 million. All
right. For more from Mike Sielski, check out the Inquirer and, of course, Philly.com as he writes the Eagles gamble that this core is good enough to win championships. We'll find out. Mike, enjoy the offseason, man.
Thanks, Mike.